We're so excited to have Starr with us. I feel like I say something similar to this each time, but this is someone who has many talents and skills that she brings to any discussion and to the work she does. And part of that is the variety of her background. While she spent many years teaching high school English and working on journalism programs and worked as an instructional coach as well, at every stage along the way, she has always kind of taken a step, outside and done a little more, found ways to share, found ways to learn and to grow. And we're so glad to have her sharing some of that today. She has a passion for many things, but the more I get to know her and the more I've read her blogs and read her articles and read the books she's authored and co-authored, I start to see these trends. One of those very clear trends is an absolute focus on students. No matter what the topic is, even sometimes when it's very personal, it always gets brought very quickly back to how does this impact students? What can I do to change my impact or others' impact on students? But I think I could take that a step broader and say maybe it's not students, but it's learners. And in her role now and in the role she's had recently, she's worked tirelessly to ensure that educators have the support they need and that they have opportunities for the learning that they want, the learning they deserve, and for moments to reflect, to take in information they need, to get the support they need to actually implement. And I know that this evening or afternoon, if you're out in California, is going to be a little taste of that. As I said, she's got Teaching Students to Self-Assess up right there. She's written many books. Just do a quick search and you'll find that. I encourage everyone after you get off tonight to read a few of her blogs, because you'll see another trend, which is that not only does she share research and practical ways to apply that research, but she always shares herself. And before we let everybody else on, we were just having some quick banter back and forth. And one of the things she said is essentially like, I'm me, I'm here as myself. And you're gonna see that genuine passion she brings and that she is giving you, Starr, when we're here. So if you'll click on one more for me, Starr. We talk about this each time, but it's very important that you know the core collaborative is all of you. It's us who work in the office. It's us who, we who are out in classrooms and in schools every day. But maybe more importantly, it's the vast network of educators who have connected us across the country. So whenever you want to learn more, find out what we're doing, check us out at thecorecollaborative.com. Join the conversation at Leading Impact Teams on Facebook. That's a great way to share the great things that are happening at your school, look for other things that are happening, find quick accessible reads on current research. We believe very strongly in models of success, and video is such a powerful way to get those models. And if you read the book that she showed just a second ago, you'll hear a little bit about that. But that's why we have our YouTube site up, so you can see and hear, what does this look like when it's done well? What does it look like throughout the journey? How can I incorporate some of this into my work? Of course, we joke about it, but it's true. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So check us out on Instagram, and please share the great things that you and your students and the other educators you work with are doing. And finally, we say, if it's happening in education, it's on Twitter. If it's not on Twitter, it may not be that important in education. So follow us at The Social Core, and make sure, of course, to follow Starr, who is a bit of an education celebrity online, which she disagrees with, but I know to be true. And with that, as I said, she's going to bring a lot of herself to this. So I'm going to hand it over and let her take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to talk about reflection tonight. It's been a real passion of mine to explore it in the classroom as well as explore it personally as an educator. And I think it really takes a deeper understanding of self to be able to bring that in front of the kids and to live it and to have it as a part of our practice, which is why tonight's learning targets for what we're going to go over is to discuss and develop a plan for teacher reflection practices for growth and for modeling, and to just put that out there. I think the reason why my students were able to reflect as well as they did was because I was doing it with them. And it took me years to get to a place where I was really good at it. It didn't happen right away. If anyone had the displeasure of seeing the first few blogs I ever wrote, for example, goodness, I'm kind of glad that they're hard to find at this point. But, you know, over time, we practice, we do what we say, kind of live the dream, and things get better as we go. We're also going to talk about enhancing targeted reflection for students throughout the learning process and helping them have a voice so that we could determine the future learning based on what we learned from their reflections. So we think about how we create this environment, how students do it throughout the process, and then how that voice gives for future learning. So we're going to start today with a video of one of my students she was a 12th grade student in my AP English class. Her name is Alicia. And I wanted to start first with a video to give you guys an idea of what reflection could look like at the end of a school year after you've been working at this, kind of front load what the end product will look like so that we could kind of work our way backwards. As we go through, I'm going to stop a couple times and kind of just make notes of what's going on. And if while you're watching, you could think about what you notice, the kind of things she's referencing, and the kind of instruction that maybe went into place before we got to this point. So I got to share the screen right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go out of here. I'm going to go into here. And of course, I can't see my screen now.
Yeah, you can stop that share at the bottom where you have the little green box, and that'll let you slide right over.
What do you see now? We good?
Still the same one.
All right, well, we're gonna resume share now. It should have done, okay, do we see? What do you see?
We still see the slide of her. See, this is a good example. We just practiced this, but you never know what might happen.
Here we go. Yeah. One more time. All right, should be there now.
Excellent, thank you. And you can make that full screen.
Okay, I'm going to in a second. It's the full screen that's the problem, I feel like. once I lose the front of what's going on. Okay.
Each paper I did, I was able to improve on my thesis. So my first paper was the poetry analysis paper, and it was really bad because I think I put my thesis in my second paragraph. It wasn't an introduction. It went into the analysis, so it didn't really make sense. But then the next paper, I think, was lit analysis, and I used Scarlet Letter, and it was more focused, and it was much better to understand. And I needed better wording, you said, but you were able to understand it and said it got better. So
okay, so I want to start by saying what she's looking at in front of her, and she's going to show you guys in a little bit, is that in order to have these conferences at the end of a year, they had to go through a preparation process where they went through their portfolio of work, and they had to reflect on the work that they felt best showed their progress. So she has made these selections, and she was talking about the specific feedback she got at the beginning of the year based on the learning she was doing and how she improved, which is why she went from the first assignment to the next assignment where she was talking about the specific feedback. Now, she's gonna say, you know, the projects I gave them and whatnot throughout, but it's really projects they've selected to do and the ways they meant to do it, but she'll explain more as we go.
I believe I was exceeding at the standard CC, SS, ELA, Literacy, W, 11 to 12.1, which is write arguments to support claims and analysis of substantive topics or text using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence. Also, in the beginning, I needed to talk more about like the author's impact instead of summarizing, because I used to use a lot of summary to try and get to my point, but then I became more selective. And I would just use certain quotes and then let myself do the talking instead of like the quotes. So then I think I can analyze quote more specifically, and I developed claims and counterclaims fairly and thoroughly, supplying the most relevant evidence for each while pointing out the strengths and limitations of both in a manner that anticipates the audience's knowledge, levels, concerns, values, and possible.
Okay, so each time she's also going back to the standards, because one of the major things we talked about in class is that when you're going to reflect on your learning and you're going to show progress, we want to make sure that it aligns with the specific standards that we were using for the year. And what they had to do was actually select from the ones we went through throughout the year, the ones that she's picking these standards. I'm not the one telling her which ones to do. So she actually cut and pasted, I suppose, from the list of standards we'd been working on. And she's showing how the specific learning is tied to what she's sharing with us. I'm gonna go into the next kind of
Biases. Also, I need to work on transitions. You said that when we got to that, my writing got better, but I still need to work on that because you can always improve your writing. So I try to implement it in my writing, not just like in the beginning of the sentences, but within the paragraph, so it flows. So I think I'm meeting the standard. Use words, phrases, and clauses as well as varied syntax.
So she's also differentiating between meeting or exceeding or reaching here. So she's assessing herself based on the level as well.
Pure groups and funny, that was my group, cohesion. I was like, wow. And one of my major goals of the year was to move away from summarizing in my concluding paragraph, because I feel like I just restated things, and that's like what we were taught, but you have to move away from that, and that we have to develop better ideas and be more general. So I think I've been doing that, and I've been getting better at that. And also, because of the assignments you gave us, you made us focus and have to write routinely over extended periods of time, because you can't do it in one sitting. So the CPAS forced us to do that. The blog posts forced us, because you have to do it weekly. I've been keeping up with it. And our research paper is forcing us to do that also with the benchmarks, and the play. The one I could play forced us to do it too. We had to keep adding, keep going. And then I kept a document of all the feedback you gave me. I got better over time, so I'm proud of that. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to stop it. She goes on to talk about the other major standards that we address. She talks about speaking. She talks about technology, which is a major push. So now I'm going to stop sharing this screen. Let's see if we could do the transition a little better.
Yeah, you got it. Practice makes perfect.
Working on that. All right, and then we're going to go back to share screen.
And while you're going, as you can imagine, there's a lot of comments about her comfortability with the language, her self-awareness, and her ability to talk about herself as a learner, and really being able to backtrack how it is she got there. And then a lot of inferences are being made about what must have gone into this in class. So there's people talking about using that specific academic language in frequent feedback. There's a question here I thought you might want to take a few seconds on. Do they have, are they provided with guidelines at the beginning of the year so they know what to reflect upon?
Okay, so that's a really great question, and we'll definitely be touching upon it throughout. But from day one, we talk about the importance of setting goals and why we reflect. And essentially, every single time we create, I would give them an assignment, and then we would go through that assignment together, and then we would develop success criteria together. And then the expectation was at the end of the project they were working on, every single time they needed to reflect. And on the wall, you can't see it right now, but it's right behind her head. There's a big poster that says, how do we reflect? And it's up on the, that's one of the first lessons, the first week of school, talking about reflection. I had a really awesome experience of looping with a lot of these students, because I taught a lot of them in the 11th grade in a different class as well, because this school was pretty small. So a lot of the students were very used to the way that I did things by the time they got to their senior year. So this wasn't necessarily completely new to the vast majority of them. But we're going to talk a little bit now about why we reflect, and we're going to kind of double back to that video at the end to wrap it all back together. So reflection in general is to assess how well we've met our goals, to look deeper into our practices and make adjustments, and to better understand ourselves as learners and leaders. And I wanted to make sure that the leader part was in there, because being a reflective educator, regardless of the role that you have, is so essential to getting buy-in with the learners you're working with all the time. Plus, if we hope to grow and to do the things that we're expecting everyone around us to do, we have to be doing them ourselves as well. So when we think about educator reflection, we think about modeled behaviors. As a teacher in the classroom, we want to be modeling the behaviors for our students, and as a leader in front of the teachers or other educators we're working with, we want to make sure that we're modeling our expectation. We need to be super transparent, and I know that Isaac had mentioned earlier that I'm pretty honest in the way that I present. I think if anything, that's sort of my legacy. I'm very, very comfortable, particularly in my blogging, with sharing the foibles of what happens in my space. And I know Pernille Rip does a phenomenal job of that as well. The realities of being in the classroom, admitting, you know, the challenges as much as celebrating the successes. And one way educators can do that is by blogging, by sharing those stories. Helping to tell the stories that we have going on in our spaces. I actually used to do is the best thing when I had like a morning prep. I would teach 1 or 2 classes and then I would write a blog post. So I was always taking pictures in my classes or collecting student work or whatever was going on. And if it was a super day, I would be so jazzed to sit down afterwards and really think about the lesson and how it went well and celebrate the kids in the space. And then there were those other days where I'd be like 20 minutes into the lesson. It was a complete and total disaster. And I had to ask myself, do I want to salvage at least some of this, stop completely, ask the kids what was going on, and kind of do a reset and start over. And then what the blog post would be that day was about, you know, the exact thing that was going on. And I would have the opportunity then to think about why it fell apart and consider what I could do differently throughout the day to make sure it was salvageable and that learning was still happening regardless of whether or not the plan went the way that it was supposed to. And I think that when we do that for our students or our colleagues, we set the standard high. We set the precedent that it's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen, but the most important thing is if you're going to make the mistake, you got to learn from the mistake. That's the most important thing. So before I kind of jump into how we start bringing this into students, does anybody have questions so far about teacher reflective practices, educator reflective practices?
And you can share your questions and thoughts on Facebook and in the Zoom if you're on with us. We've had kind of a steady stream of thoughts and reflections coming through, how powerful it is to see students cite the standard, know the wording of it, but then go so much deeper, know where it fits in the progression, and be able to talk about it as something understood by a young learner, not I can read it off the wall or I've been made to memorize this. And it's such an exciting thing to see. I love this little quote from Stacy: "The best plans are those we can change as needed."
It's true.
And then anybody who has any of these thoughts or questions, please continue to share them. And I'll jump in from time to time and let Starr know what people are thinking and asking, and we'll keep going.
All right. So as we transition into, someone had asked before, you know, was this something that got brought up at the very beginning of the year, and did it transition throughout the year? The answer is absolutely yes. On day one, the conversation about learning targets, why are we learning what we're learning? How does this impact us on an everyday basis? Those kind of conversations were happening all the time. It wasn't just, you know, at the end of a marking period, now it's time for us to think about things. It was throughout the process. So when should students reflect? I would say ongoing. And it could be in a number of different ways. I like to have them formally writing reflections at the end of most projects. You could do formative check-ins at the end of individual days. You could have them reflecting after a particular one-day assignment. You could have them do it ahead of time. When you're opening a unit, what do you hope to learn? What are you bringing to this already? What are your goals? How does that set the tone for what's going to happen next? And really thinking about how how this whole situation is going to come together in the process, because we can't just expect them to tie it on. In the beginning of the year, they used to say to me, Miss Saxton, it's almost like you have me doing 2 different writing assignments. So they do the project, and then I had them do these written reflections. At the beginning of the year, especially with my 9th graders, and I had a bunch of different kinds of learners in my journalism class, so I would get like a paragraph the first time around when we talked about reflecting. And it was usually about some kind of, do I like this assignment? It wasn't really about, you know, the learning that happened. So that first time we kind of walk through how you do a good reflection. And the way that is I always like them to restate what they were asked to do in their own words. I think it's really important that before we assess students, we have a good understanding of what it is they thought they were supposed to do, because sometimes we think we communicated that really well as educators, and we look at the body of work that comes back to us and it doesn't look anything like what we thought we were going to get. So that's clearly a user error on the adult side and not on the kid side. So if I know what they were thinking they were supposed to do, it gives me a very clear lens on how to assess them, because I should be assessing them based on what they thought they were supposed to do and not necessarily what I had hoped they would do. So the first part is always restating what it is they thought they were supposed to do. The second part is always about the process. How did they do the learning? The next part is, how well do they felt that, how do they know that they learned it? Where is the evidence in the work itself? So when people were saying before, it really seems like she understands these standards and she knows where to plug them in, it's because they had to do this all year long. You teach kids how to write an argumentative essay. Well, that's kind of like what this paragraph is. You're going to tell me why you think you're meeting or approaching or exceeding the standard, but then you're going to have to give me evidence from your work to support why you're saying that. And then the next part is, what did I struggle with? What were the challenges I encountered? Did I overcome them? How did I overcome them? And if I didn't overcome them, is this going to be a goal that I carry on with me to the next assignment that we do? And then the wrap up is, if I had to assess myself based on the rubric we created, where do I stand in terms of mastery? And then they assess themselves at the end. And I read that reflection first before I provide them with any kind of feedback at that part of the process.
That in your book really blew me away the first time I read that you have these 2 assignments kind of side by side, but you read the reflection, and then that saves all of that analysis piece for yourself at first. So you can just hone in and say, okay, I'm really going to hit this. And now I kind of know what they need. Yeah, keep going.
I mean, what happens. I mean, as an English teacher, a lot of times we go by the specific mini lessons that we taught, and we're looking for something specific when we're looking at their writing. And there ends up being like 5 or 6 comments that we put on everybody's papers because we're only looking for the same thing. Unfortunately, in reality, every kid is starting at a different point. So some of them may have mastered some of the stuff we're already starting, and others may still be struggling with it. So why should I give them feedback on something that they've already mastered if that's not what they're working on? So if they tell me the goals that they had and which strategies they decided to use in their reflection, then I could look very specifically when I'm looking at their work, like, hey, this is something they were working on, and I think they got it. So I'm going to call that out, validate it, express the fact that they were able to meet the standard they were working on, and tell them why they met it better than before. Because of course we want the feedback to be extremely specific. We don't want to just say good job or you did this well. We want to say you did this well. You were able to have cohesion through your second and third paragraphs, like Alicia was talking about. And I could see it because there was clear transitions between the paragraph that came before. And what I would do if I was in a Google Doc would be to highlight that section in the comments that I was writing so that they knew the specific area that I was talking about. And then what would happen is they would set a new goal once we got to the end, because after I validated that, I might recognize a different area in their work that now needs to be worked on. So it's good for both of us. And with older kids, at least the ones I was working with, they were responsible for tracking that feedback as well.
Excellent.
like, Alicia was saying. And it's super easy with Google Docs because they can just cut and paste what's in the comments and put it in a new document. And I like them to track it where, they have the assignment, the date, the feedback, and then the action plan. What are they going to do with the feedback that they got? Which is basically how we get into this enhancing reflection that I have on the screen right now.
Yeah.
In the beginning, when kids write reflections, we have to give feedback on the reflection the same way we would with a piece of writing. So if kids only tell us about what the assignment was about, or there are missing elements, this is a great opportunity to say, hey, you did a great job telling me about the assignment. You started telling me about your process, but there's no evidence. There's no tie to the standards. This would be a good place for you to add a standard. How does this relate? So in the beginning, and for some kids, it might not just be the beginning. It might be until December that you are reminding them constantly that a reflection's not done until it aligns with particular standards, but it's something you need to commit to and just make reminders about. It might be a good idea after the second or third time to provide them with models from classmates, if the classmates are okay with it, so that they could see what it looks like and highlight the areas of where it's different, or depending on the level of the student, asking them to really look at the difference between the two. Where did they notice the differences? Highlight the areas that they think are different, and then get them to kind of notice where, how could you add more here? What do you need to do? And then I allow them to revise them the same way I would with anything else.
So you're really using the formative process to teach reflection itself. You've got the exemplars, you have them comparing examples and non-examples. And that leads, if this is a good time, there's been a few questions about when you launch, how or do you do modeling and think aloud up front? And, is there kind of a show and tell time before they ever do their first one? And what's that like?
Absolutely. So in the very, 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 very beginning, depending on the age group that I'm working with freshmen, it would be a little different, where I wouldn't want to show them something one of my senior students wrote, because I think it could be a little intimidating to show them a 2-page reflection on assignment that they're never going to encounter in the 9th grade. But we look at paragraphs at a time. So we might focus specifically on how you talk about what the assignment was about. And maybe the first part is us actually walking through it as a class. So we focus on, the first paragraph. I show them a couple of models, what's successful about this, what, if we're thinking about success criteria of what makes a good reflection, and we determine that discussing, what the assignment is showing is what they're trying to do. I give them a bunch of different examples of what that looks like, and then we'll spend a day where they'll write just that first paragraph, and then they'll, peer assess with the partner. They'll look at it. The partners will be looking for those very specific things we were talking about, and they'll have the opportunity to add it in, or if it's good as it is, they will, we'll use it as an exemplar for the next time around. And then we go through each paragraph the same way. It might take a little longer to do the evidence paragraphs, because those actually require them to understand the standards. And usually at the beginning of a unit, I will bring out the standards and we will decide as a group what that looks like in kid-friendly language. So it's not just reading straight off the Common Core. It's, like, what does this look like in our class, instead of, here's what it says on the website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been 3 or 4 comments about that, how powerful it was to hear those concepts and skills addressed through student language, and then some questions about how did you get there. So you really hit that for us. Just a couple of things I want to call out, because the chat is pretty busy, but how powerful it is what you just shared about students being on their own learning path, and the way that really honors each student's dignity as a person and as a learner in your class. And then of course some things about like how technology is helping to make this more efficient, and literally just to make some of it possible that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago for that many students.
Right. Well, I mean, I can honestly say as well, it's not just the Google Suite, although that really has made the process more iterative. In New York City, where I was teaching, the students, I mean, I had 34 students in my class, and at higher level English classes, that's still a lot of papers to get through. Yeah. And every single child should have the same level of devotion and commitment to the space that they're in. So we used a lot of different ways. The video that you saw at the beginning, Alicia had chosen to have that one-on-one conference with me, and she allowed me to video it. But other students were allowed to do screencasts, create podcasts, do videos if they wanted to create a movie, do written ones. So they also had a lot of choice in the way they provided their reflection, because for me at that point, it wasn't necessarily only about the writing, it was about their level of metacognitive awareness of their learning. And if they felt more confident talking about it rather than writing about it, then it didn't really matter much to me the way it came to me. We also used Voxer on their assignments. So like every once in a while, if I were sitting in my car reading a student paper and I was giving feedback, I would actually get on Voxer and be like, in paragraph 2, I'm reading this sentence, and I think you need to work on A, B, and C. And sometimes, particularly with students who need more help, them hearing my voice, I found was a far more effective way to give constructive feedback, because it doesn't sound as negative as it could sound on the paper, or the amount of words I'd have to write to just kind of sidetrack some of the content, the connotation of some of what needs to be said. So if they hear me saying it and they know that I'm looking at something specific and there's an idea, I try to also use my voice when necessary to give them feedback while they were working on their learning as well. And that was something that came up in my own reflection, and how to get some of that really more challenging constructive feedback to students, because no kid wants to see you throw up red all over their paper. It's the surest way to shut them down in the learning process. So something you learn over time after you do a little reflection as an English teacher is learning to really focus the feedback that you give and choose wisely with what you're doing.
I love that. Hashtag focus the feedback.
You got to, right?
Yeah.
So how does reflection improve the learning process? I'm going to say right up front that, to be completely transparent, there were plenty of times that I thought my students who weren't doing the work weren't learning, because I had no evidence of the learning. So it seemed, because I didn't have a tangible object to show for what was going on in the space. But I think we have a lot of auditory learners in our spaces who don't necessarily need to write things down to actually learn. And using a reflection is an opportunity to allow them the space to tell us what they've learned, the stuff that we can't see. And it also helps us with instruction, because that communication between what they actually took away from the assignment and what we perceived that they took away from the assignment allows for the instruction to really be tailored to the needs of the folks who are in the space. Plus, it also helps with the peer engagement with each other, because again, I feel like the better they understand themselves, the better they're able to help each other. Alicia had mentioned in the video about when she mentioned cohesion, that was a part of the expert groups, which is a part of this peer feedback in the classroom book that is on the side here. And the whole idea is that we create groups of students who become experts in particular skills. And what they do is they build their efficacy as a group around a particular skill set, so that when we're doing workshops, students know that those particular students are the ones to go to if you're having a challenge with a particular skill set. So instead of coming to me right away, they're going to each other, because we've built into the structure of class that these students are the ones who have been trained and they've reflected on their own writing, and then they're able to give better feedback to their classmates. So I'm going to take a pause for a second. I see like there are kind of blowing up here.
Yeah, so there's just so many things that you're triggering for people that they can share things they're having success with, or things they're kind of wondering. And then some of the things I don't ignore, but I jot a note because I know you're going to get to it. But one piece that just came out was another real strong hit on honoring each child's dignity, which is to say, that there can be resentment between those levels of courses. Am I in honors? Am I in AP? What's my track? And that this gives all children, all students, all learners a voice. And then it really also helps us to see all of them as who they are, not as that label. You are going here, so you're this type of student. We read that reflection and realize, oh, here's a journalist.
Right.
They didn't know they could do it because of whatever previous experience. And then other people sharing some of the experiences they've had with reflections, and just how much you can learn from that, even when it's just a few times, but then especially as you start to really build it in. And then there's one more thing I really wanted to hit. There's so many things I can't keep up. And again, that idea of these standards are so difficult to decode. Yep. And they're meaningless to an 18-year-old, much less a 14-year-old or a 6-year-old. And so how powerful it is that you make it something that is theirs now, and that you make it clear that they said it better than this, but that this is what success and the standard looks like for us. Not what the standard says, but this is what success is like. So that's what you're seeing blowing up, is that and some good interaction. So keep these thoughts and questions. If there's anything we missed by accident, we look back over this and we'll make sure Starr gets back to you.
So, I mean, something I really want to talk about is the fact that all learning isn't visible. I say this a lot when I present because with the grade stuff that I kind of, I advocate for getting rid of grades, because I kind of believe that some of our most talented and curious and bright students aren't the ones that necessarily perform the best by school standards for a lot of different reasons. They have their own story going on at home. School's not as important. School doesn't spark the curiosity in them the same way that a YouTube video might, or a book that they've picked up, or that very specific thing that they've sort of already tailored their life toward, or, gaming or coding or whatever it is. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I made in my early career was making assumptions about kids based on what I could see just in front of me in those 45 minutes a day. And I made some really terrible mistakes about kids and misread situations. And it doesn't really make for very good communication or trust when you start making accusations about kids to them about why they aren't doing things, or you come at them for missing things. So I really felt like this reflective process was an opportunity to give them their voice back. So maybe you couldn't, or you didn't want to complete the work that we were doing, but you had the opportunity to share the learning that you did anyway, and give me a little context to understand what was going on for you while this was happening. And it really helped me throughout the process to give them more alternatives. Because at the end of the day, their success is what matters most. And it doesn't have to be success in the way that I see it in my head. It has to be success in the way that they feel it in their hearts. So creating opportunities that really allow them to shine in a way that they could feel proud of themselves is so, so, so important. And it took me years to figure that out. I look back on it now and I kind of feel a little bit like a dummy that it took me as long as it did. But ever since I shifted that perspective, the relationships I had built with kids were so much richer. And that's the other thing about reflections as well. And it doesn't just have to be in an English class. It could be in a math class, in a science class, and a social studies class. Any opportunity we give kids to let them tell us about their learning, we're giving them an opportunity to open up to us that could be invaluable to their future learning.
Yeah, I made a comment just a few minutes ago that it's interesting how the discussion in the chat parallels everything you're sharing, but sometimes one comes right before the other. And then that was just another example when you shared about how that reflection opens us up to each child and opens each child up to each other and to that awareness of themselves. Came right after we had comments from a primary special education teacher which looking from the outside would seem like the most opposite thing you could do from what we're talking about, which is high school lit courses. But we're seeing that regardless, all these things connect. And then again, you're proving me right by saying that you would share yourself. And so I think it's powerful that, I know you would never say this, but in some ways you're coming to us as an expert in sharing what you've seen work and what you know, and what you've studied and what you've learned from others. But you're also admitting like this is a journey. And I would just stop for 2 seconds to reiterate that one more time and say, whether you've been an educator for 30 minutes or 30 years, there's no time it's too late to get started with something like this, or to take that next step. And the payoff, you said, beyond all the academic payoff, which is so important, is that relationship piece. And now however many more children realizing, I can do this, I feel that success, I see someone who sees success in my future. And I can't imagine any better reason to be a teacher than that.
Well, I mean, I also want to double back too for the leadership side of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in the classroom for 16 years. And when I left the classroom, I was feeling pretty good about myself in that space. I felt like I had a good handle on what I was doing. I had systems in place. The kids knew the systems. It was completely student-centered. As a matter of fact, the last year that I was in the classroom, the kids redesigned the vast majority of the projects that I had done. Like, I had given complete control to them. Mm-hmm. And when I stepped into the leadership role that I was in last, it was like starting from scratch again in a lot of ways, except I had 16 years of memory of being good at something else that was tangentially related. Mm-hmm. And there is something extraordinarily humbling about being in a situation where you don't feel like your best self. Mm-hmm. In front of other people, nonetheless, like other people who are judging you furiously all the time. Teachers, and I'm sure I could say that I was one of them at some point with a leader. I mean, when I was a teacher, I can honestly say, I probably said 100 times, I could do this so much better if I was in charge. It's a lot harder than it looks. Uh-huh. There's a lot of stuff good leaders don't let you see as an educator. I learned that the hard way. I also definitely, the reflective process for me as a leader couldn't be as transparent as easily as it was as a teacher, because adults are watching your every move, and kids are too, but differently. And kids are far more forgiving in my experience than adults are. So even when you approach a situation in a reflective vein, transparently saying, you know what, I didn't handle that as well as I could have. And I did that plenty in my 2 years in the leadership role that I was in. I spent a lot of time not apologizing, but admitting that I could have done it better. I don't think you should be sorry for something you tried your best at, but your best wasn't necessarily the best for that situation. Mm-hmm. But I did spend a lot of time going back to the people and trying to do a retake the way I might have with students, and admitting where I struggled and kind of trying to get feedback from them, because part of having that reflection is that dialogue between the people that you're working with. And as a leader, sometimes we feel like we have to know everything. Teachers feel that way too, but it's just, I think you get a lot more miles out of being honest about what you know and what you continually need help with. And there are plenty of teachers, just like there are plenty of students out there that we could learn so much from if we just let our guard down and say, you know what, I need help too, and you're the person I'm coming to get that help. So important.
And that is an example of reflection. Deep and focused, and was something that moves us forward. So I've just put in the chat, but also if you're with us on Facebook, if you've got any questions or thoughts, please send them right now, and Starr will be able to respond. And of course, if you have questions later, you can email us and we will follow up. I'm Isaac at thecorecollaborative.com, and we'll make sure I get anything you send. to Starr. And then I know, did you still want to pop back to that video for a minute, or do you feel?
Sure. I mean, we could definitely, I mean, we could see how she wraps up. It's kind of
Yeah,
cute.
that'll
Right.
give people just a minute to think through, reflect, see if they've got any more questions or thoughts they want to share,
All right, hold on. Trying to
and a
find.
great way to see her success.
All right, stop sharing for a second. We'll see if, again, better transitioning this time.
And as you go, so many of the thoughts coming from people are kind of really aligned with what you've been talking about. And I think one thing after this we might want a little bit more about is how you are able to manage this reflection with that many students. And I know you already hit on that, but if you had a couple of quick, here's something I learned that maybe you won't have to learn because of me.
So, sure, I could kind of speak to that.
Mm-hmm. And then you can just reshare again, and then we'll see that video.
Okay, hold on.
Love the honesty and authenticity. That's coming from Facebook. This is from Paul. Actually, so glad you're part of this network, which I second that. And then there's so many things coming up that I can't quite catch them all. They would love to hear too how you co-construct those rubrics and use that to add to student understanding and ownership. So good, lots of questions coming in. So I'll let you take it away, and then I'll share the questions we're getting.
Okay, could you see the video now on the screen?
You got it.
Okay, so how do we co-construct? A lot of the times when we're going through the standards, we actually talk about, because they'll have an assignment sheet in front of them that we're starting with, like a project assignment sheet. And I'm not talking about like a one pager that we're handing out. They're usually pretty extensive. So kids are asked to annotate them, ask questions, sort of build out what skills they think are going to be necessary to be successful. And of course, in my head, I've backward planned so that I'm trying to think in my head, what am I going to do? What do I need to teach in mini lessons while they're working on these projects ahead of time? But then I kind of get them to tell me exactly so that we could make sure that my assumptions and their needs are aligned. And then from there, based on what's happening in class each day, I go around and collect data while they're working on those assignments. I'm overhearing their conversations. I'm jotting things down. And what I notice is usually how I'll create mini lessons for the next days moving forward. So although I'll have ideas, that success criteria is thought of like, okay, so how am I gonna know I'm masterful on this particular skill set? What is that gonna look like? How will I know how to engage with that in my space? And the first few times I might have other student samples to show them. I might try to elicit it in different ways, because for some kids, like I said, if I'm working with a 9th grade class, this isn't something they've really done before. So in a journalism class, it was really easy because, let's say, to write a news article, there were very specific things that needed to be in a news article. So while I was teaching news writing, we would align those specific things with the standard. So writing a lead is like creating the main idea of something. So that's in a nonfiction piece. So those would be the words that we would start tying together. How do we know when we have a good lead? We know it's got the, the 4 W's and the 5 W's and the H, and we also know that it's engaging and readers want to know more, and it follows all of the stylistic things that we learned about in class. So I don't sugarcoat things for kids. The learning happens with the language that goes with it in a way that they can understand, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so really a huge part of it, you're doing all that so they are clear on those success criteria. So we're taking the guesswork out of it. This is how you write a good blank. This is how you do this, but you're doing it together. So there's no, like you said, there's none of this where, okay, we're here. Then I ask you at the end and realize, nope. I thought we were together, but really I was thinking A and you were thinking Z. And so people are kind of responding to that you're creating those mastery moments. You're really building efficacy through all of this.
Well, when we give them the target to shoot for and they could see the target clearly, the likelihood of them hitting the target is a lot greater than us, shouting it
Yeah.
out like there's a target on the other side of the room, see what you could do to get
Yeah,
it.
right.
But not ever really bringing it into focus for them. And I was definitely guilty of that for a long time. I think it's an oversight. We really think sometimes that these kinds of things are clear, and you hear something simple and it's like, oh, duh, that really would make things easier. I mean, maybe in the beginning I would have thought that that was like cheating or something.
Yeah, right.
But it's really, you're not giving them answers. I think if anything, what you're doing, especially if you're giving them opportunities to make choices about what and how they're doing the work, you're just showing them what the expectation is, and then it's their level of learning and their decision how far they want to take it based on what they already know. And then you're there to support them along the way.
Yeah.
So, which is, so important. Was there another question in there too that I missed?
Yeah, because you're getting like some little pop-up follow-ups as it goes. With that, just do you have an example of how you're clear with students where you don't sugarcoat it, but it's also not going to hurt those feelings of students who have so much change in their lives already?
So I always like to do the assignments that we were doing before the kids on a topic that I know they weren't going to choose, so that I would kind of understand where they would fall if they were going to fall, like where I might struggle, what was clear and what wasn't clear. And I share that and I show them what that could look like. And then we talk about it. Like there's a lot of back and forth. I don't feel uncomfortable asking kids to tell me how I can improve in that way, like what would make this better. We did a lot of stuff where we would do small pieces of things when we were looking at specific, let's say like evidence-based stuff. If I'm writing a research paper and I need to have multiple sources and I need to be able to put all those things together, and that's part of the success criteria, that I'm using multiple sources to support what I'm trying to prove. But some kids might take huge chunks of text and do nothing with it. Or some kids might, plagiarize a whole paragraph and not cite it appropriately, even though we talk about that ad nauseum. And those kind of things would be the stuff that we would talk about. And instead of just talking about what success looks like, we would also talk about what the opposite of success might look like. Where might those challenges arise? What strategies can you use? And that's where the mini lessons would be once I saw where they were actually falling off, because you have such a limited amount of time in class. You don't want to make too many assumptions. You want to see what they'll do first and then make the shifts in the instruction based on what's actually happening, not just on what you assume could happen. So, I mean, sometimes you just have to have those hard conversations with kids privately if what they've presented isn't meeting the success criteria. And, it's like you want them to be reflective. So the same way I might have done it with a teacher in an observation, I send them the script. I give them some very targeted reflective questions. Before I tell them what I was challenged with, I give them an opportunity to see it themselves. And then, hopefully we could come to the table ready to have that conversation because you know what I'm looking for. I gave you a copy of the script and now we're going to talk about it. And if there's no surprise, I try to take the surprise out if I can.
Well, and Yvette mentioned the power of those strong relationships to change how we hear and accept feedback and anything that relationship shapes that. And I know you really started by talking about this builds relationships, and then relationships encourage reflection and deepen it.
Yes.
So really that's kind of come full circle. So I know you wanted to share just a little bit more of this video and then we'll wrap up. As you have more questions or thoughts, keep sending them to us, and you can do that even after this is over. We'll definitely respond.
Here we go. So you talked a lot about the writing, which I love. Tell me a little bit about your reading and presenting, those two other major standards that we worked on in class.
Well, I like presenting sometimes because it's fun. So I think that I improved at my presentation, because one presentation was really bad one time because we just didn't work together or go over it, and it was a mess. But then I worked with a different group, and I made sure that, hey guys, we got to practice because I don't want to repeat what happened before. And it was much better. We were more organized. We got our point across. I think it was Pride and Prejudice when we had, I forgot what they're called, but you don't make any sound.
The tableau.
The tableau, yes. And reading, let's see. In the beginning, we started off with Animal Farm. That was a short book. That was good. You made us do a presentation on that also. And I think my group was with Lara and Peter, and we were pigs. Oh yeah, we were pigs, and then we made little costumes and everything. And it helped us to understand how it connected to the George Orwell's time about communism. I remember when we had to do the Christmas Carol, and we had to work with another group because it was group oriented, and we used Justin Bieber because we used Justin Bieber songs. So we relied heavily on the music, but we also made sure to incorporate that we knew what we were doing, like how selfish he was and how he was able to change over time. So we made Bieber like that, and we song lyrics and just.
Excellent. And as far as your use of technology in the class, has that developed more? Has it been useful? What did you take away from that?
I think I think I've improved definitely because I didn't really like Google Docs, but I've used it so much. I think I'm good at Google Docs. I'm not good at iMovie though. I don't know. I would have to work on that because that's a lot of work and hard. Sound there, making it cut off. Yeah, that's still complicated.
And social media?
Social media, oh, definitely. I use it so much more. I didn't even have Twitter before this class, and now I have 2 Twitters.
So talk to me about your level of mastery overall. Where do you feel you are right now at the end of the year?
At the end of the year, I think I'm at like an A- because I still have improvement, but it's improved drastically like over the time periods and over the extensive writing we did because the writing has definitely improved and has helped me to become a better writer. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm at an A-.
All right, thank you. Okay, so in the background here, I don't know if you could see, so like the little piece of paper that's in the corner there is Marzano's rubric of levels of competency. Mm-hmm. And we kind of have it aligned with the kind of feedback they've been getting all year. So in different videos with kids, you might see them turn around to look at the rubric that's hanging on the wall in terms of where they see themselves falling on the continuum. And also on that bulletin board behind her is the reflection rubric and the portfolio rubric, which talks to them about how to select the work that goes into the portfolio based on the reflections that they've done the whole time. And then those Post-it notes behind them were their 1 words for the years that they were focusing on behind them. So I feel pretty fortunate. Alicia, who was in this video, she wasn't my best student. She wasn't my worst student. She was a solid middle of the road student to give you an idea of the level of candor and articulation that students were able to bring to these conversations. I was very fortunate at this school. We also had student-led portfolio conferences. So students were talking about their learning all the time. It wasn't just in my class. Okay, so.
Oops, and I put a comment that was the room is full of the students, but I meant the students' work and the students thinking. That's kind of funny.
Okay, so now I'm going to pull back the slideshow.
And as you can imagine, people are so thankful for you giving your time, Starr. This has been wonderful, and the discussion has been so powerful. We'll reach out to anybody who has further questions, and of course, we'll share out some links and some other things. You can reach out to us at any time. You can always find out more about us. We are the Core Collaborative. Next month, so excited to have Kara. She's going to be really sharing how you can develop these learner identities within students. She's going to be sharing about her journey and some of the learning she's done, and you're going to leave with some clear steps for how you can make, how you can ensure that your students are kind of taking that next step and getting to where they really deeply understand themselves as learners and that they can learn. So that's August 15th. We're always the 3rd Thursday of every month. Click on for me, please. Great. We love this way that we can communicate. But there's something to be said for being together in the same space physically. And I used to kind of say this, but now it's really true. We're going to be in a city near you. We're all across the states. So if you're a science person, find us in Brooklyn. We've got so many opportunities to learn more and change your practice through impact teams and through Included. That thread of dignity was kind of woven throughout from what Starr shared and through so many of the comments and questions we had. And if that's somewhere that you're taking yourself or your teams, Included is really something you should look into, because that's what it looks at, is how do we know the difference between when we honor dignity and when we don't, and how can we change that for ourselves and for all the relationships we have. If you'll click on one more, please. Peer Power, we are so excited about this, coming out very soon. 13 authors are involved in this great project, and it's really about how do we take assessment and use it to give learning back to students, and how do we take control of our classrooms and our schools and our systems so that we can start that revolution. We can make assessment for students and by students and of students instead of to students. We'll click on one more. I am still pumped from Mind Fueled this year, but it's never too early to make your plans. We are switching up the location, but we're not switching up the power of what's happening. So we hope that you'll join us in Vail. That's already available for you to start thinking about planning for. We'll be back in June the 29th and 30th. And we've got some of the same great stuff, but as always, it's going to be new and fresh and focused on you and all of us and how we can grow together. If you're interested, you can always check us out on leadingimpactteams.com, or you can link there from thecorecollaborative.com, and you can look back at this video and grab that scan. You can take a quick pre-assessment that lets you and lets us know where you are in this process of expanding student ownership of learning and building that efficacy for students and that efficacy for ourselves as adults. And then we're happy to talk you through it. Maybe we have some thoughts that we can share, or maybe we'll have a partnership in the future. And then finally, as I said before, we are a network, so please join us. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, so we can share back and forth. We're on YouTube with a lot of what Starr was really doing for us tonight, which is sharing those models of success. And then, of course, we are at thecorecollaborative.com. We're seeing a lot of thank yous here and a lot of hellos and goodbyes. But from the bottom of our hearts, thank you, Starr, for sharing your time and expertise and your passion for changing the lives of all of us. And thank you to each of you for sharing your two most valuable assets, your time and attention. And with that,
so much
we'll
fun.
sign off. Yeah, thank you. And we'll see you next month.